This program helps you to revise cell structure, movement, the human reproductive system, breathing, classification of animals, and feeding relationships. First up, cell structure. Here's what you need to know.
All living things are made up of cells. There are two types you need to know about: animal cells and plant cells. Make sure you know what a typical cell looks like, what the different parts are called, and what each part does.
Watch this. This scientist is getting ready to look at the cells in a piece of human skin. Cells are the tiny building blocks that all living things are made of. Because cells are so small, they can only be seen using a microscope. In this microscopic image, each round blob is a single cell. A typical animal cell looks like this. Inside, it has three important parts: a nucleus, cytoplasm, and a cell membrane. Each part of the cell has a specific job to do. The cell membrane is a thin outer covering. Its job is to control what goes in and out of the cell. Substances like glucose and oxygen are allowed in. Waste and other chemicals pass out. Most of the inside of an animal cell is made up of a jelly-like stuff called cytoplasm. All the chemical reactions that keep the cell alive take place here. The nucleus controls the cell and contains the genetic information needed to make new cells. Plants are made of cells too. This is a typical cell from a leaf. It has a box-like shape and is similar to an animal cell in three ways. It's got a nucleus, cytoplasm, and a cell membrane. But a plant cell has three other parts that make it different. There's the thick outer covering known as the cell wall. This is made of cellulose, a strong material which gives the cell a rigid shape. Plant cells also contain a space in the middle called a vacuole, filled with a watery liquid. The other important difference between plant cells and animal cells is that the cytoplasm in a plant cell includes small green blobs or chloroplasts. These contain the chemical chlorophyll, which makes them look green. Chloroplasts trap energy from the sun, which the plant uses to make glucose in a process called photosynthesis. But not all animal and plant cells look like these typical cells. Some are specially adapted, depending on where they are. The cells in the leaves and stems of a plant are different to the cells in the roots. Root cells aren't green. They don't have chloroplasts. Why do you think this is? Test yourself. The diagram shows a plant cell. The cell is from a leaf. Give two parts labelled on the diagram which are not present in animal cells. This section revises how the human body moves. Here's what you need to know.
Your skeleton is a framework of bones that support and protect your body. Bones are also involved in movement, but they don't move on their own, they need muscles. You need to know that muscles make your bones move by pulling them into position, and they nearly always work in pairs, called antagonistic muscle pairs.
Watch this. The human body is capable of a huge range of movement. Every move involves bones, joints and muscles all working together. 650 muscles in the human body, which cover most of the skeleton. If we could peel back the skin, they'd look very similar to the muscle on this chicken leg. Animals, like humans, are also covered in muscle. It's a meaty tissue that's smooth and stretchy. This muscle is attached to the bones in the lower leg by strong white fibres called tendons. Give them a pull and the lower leg moves. Pulling the muscle on the other side of the leg moves it back. When muscles work, they get shorter and fatter. They contract. As a muscle contracts, the tendons pull on the bone and it moves. This bulging muscle on the top of the arm is the biceps. As the biceps contracts, the lower arm is pulled up. Another muscle is needed on the other side to make the arm move back. This muscle is the triceps. As it contracts, the biceps relaxes and the lower arm moves back. Because the biceps and triceps work in opposite directions, they're known as a pair of antagonistic muscles. Muscles work in pairs all over the body, pulling bones into position. Our gymnast lifts his lower body using muscles in his back and the back of the legs. Muscles in the abdomen and front of the legs stop him from going too far. To keep his strength balanced, he needs to work equally on each muscle in each pair. This exercise works his abdominal muscles. The antagonistic muscles are in his back. Can you spot the muscle pair working in this exercise? Test yourself. This diagram is a simplified drawing of bones and muscles in a left leg viewed from the outer side. Muscle A contracts. What effect does this have on the lower leg? This section revises the human reproductive system. Here's what you need to know.
It just takes one sperm cell and one egg cell to make a baby.
These special cells are produced in the reproductive organs.
You need to know about the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system.
This includes what happens to the egg cell during the menstrual cycle and what happens during fertilisation.
Watch this. A boy's reproductive organs are mainly outside his body. The penis is made of soft, spongy tissue. Behind it hangs a bag of skin called the scrotum, and inside are two testes. When a boy reaches puberty, it's here that sperm are produced. Each testis is attached to a long, thin tube called a sperm duct, This connects to another tube called the urethra, which runs down the centre of the penis. Millions of microscopic tadpole-shaped sperm cells are made and stored every day. Inside the human body, it's too warm for them to survive, so they have to be kept on the outside. A girl's reproductive organs are hidden inside her body. Making a triangle with your hands gives a good idea of how much space they take up. Egg cells are made in 2 ovaries. Each ovary is close to a fallopian tube, which connects it to the uterus or womb. The uterus is linked to the outside of the body by a muscle-lined tube called the vagina. Girls are born with thousands of egg cells inside each ovary. When a girl reaches puberty, one of the ovaries releases an egg each month. The egg travels to the fallopian tube and then towards the uterus. At the same time, the uterus gets ready to grow a baby by developing a fleshy lining. If the egg doesn't meet a sperm at this point, a baby can't develop, so the egg just continues its journey. When the body realizes that no baby is growing, the fleshy lining of the uterus begins to break down. This is the start of the menstrual cycle. The uterus lining passes out of the vagina. It takes several days and is known as menstruation or a period. A few days later, another egg is released and a new lining begins to form. Millions of sperm may enter the female during sexual intercourse. They swim into the uterus and along the fallopian tubes. If this happens when an egg is travelling down the tube, one of the sperm might reach the egg and fertilise it. For this to happen, the egg and the sperm have to join together. The fertilised egg then attaches itself to the lining of the uterus and begins to develop into a new human being. The body realises that a baby is growing and menstruation does not take place. It takes on 1 sperm to make a baby. Test yourself. This question is about the menstrual cycle. Choose the correct word from each list to complete the sentences. Menstruation is part of a monthly, weekly, or daily cycle. The cycle begins when the lining of the uterus, an ovary, or the vagina breaks away. This section revises breathing. Here's what you need to know.
Breathing. We do it all the time, often without thinking. Remember, there's 2 parts to every breath. Inhaling, taking air into your lungs, and exhaling, breathing out. Inhaling supplies oxygen, a gas we need to stay alive. Exhaling gets rid of carbon dioxide, a waste gas produced by our body. Asthmatics and smokers can have problems breathing. You need to know about the structure of the lungs and how smoking can damage them.
Watch this. Claire has asthma. She's used her inhaler, so dancing won't bring on an attack, but she still gets out of breath more quickly than her classmate. The amount of air that Claire on the left can breathe in and out is reduced. Her lungs have to work much harder. Her friend breathes more slowly. So, what's happening inside a healthy pair of lungs? Inhaled air travels from your nose or mouth to the windpipe. Its scientific name is the trachea. This tube divides into two smaller tubes called bronchi, which connect the trachea to each lung. The trachea and bronchi are kept open by rings of cartilage. Inside the lungs, these tubes divide even more to form a network of smaller branching tubes called bronchioles. Place a small camera down the windpipe and you can see the path taken by each breath of air. The walls of the tubes are made of muscle. In a normal pair of lungs, the muscle is relaxed and the airways wide open. It's easy for air to flow in and out. For someone with asthma, this flow of air is more difficult. In a bad asthma attack, Claire can become desperate for air. Normally, each bronchiole is wide open, but in the lung of someone with asthma, the muscles lining the airways contract, making the diameter of each tube smaller. This restricts the amount of air which can enter or leave the lungs, and instead of being pink, the airways are red and inflamed. There's no cure for asthma, so Claire has to use an inhaler twice a day. It contains a drug which relaxes the muscles in her lungs and widens her bronchial tubes so that she can breathe normally. Everyone knows smoking is bad for you. It can damage the lungs in various ways. Compare these healthy lungs from a non-smoker with these seriously damaged lungs from a smoker. The black bits are charcoal and tar from tobacco smoke that have built up from years of smoking. This white growth is a cancerous tumour. Joyce has a smoking-related disease called emphysema. She used to smoke between 20 and 30 cigarettes a day. Now she has difficulty breathing and needs a special supply of oxygen to get her breath back to normal. The problem is that cigarette smoke has damaged the most delicate part of Joyce's lungs. At the end of each bronchiole, there are tiny air sacs. Each air sac is made up of hollow bubbles called alveoli. Millions of alveoli give the lungs the big surface area they need for gas exchange to take place. Here, oxygen diffuses out and carbon dioxide diffuses in. Smoking breaks down the thin walls of the alveoli. This means Joyce's lungs have a smaller surface area. Why does this cause her to get out of breath so easily? Test yourself. In the diagram below, tube A connects the lungs to the mouth. Part B is a part of the lung where gas exchange takes place. What are the names of tube A and part B? This section revises classification of animals. Here's what you need to know.
Classification is used to group living things. Animals are divided into two groups depending on whether or not those without a backbone, like snails, are called invertebrates. Those with a backbone, like humans, are called vertebrates. You need to know how to recognize the 5 different vertebrates: mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles.
Watch this. Skin covering is one sign used to identify the 5 different types of vertebrate. Other characteristics of these animals are how they produce and feed their young and how they keep themselves warm. What type of vertebrate are these chimps? Look at their body covering. They're mammals because their skin is covered in hair. All mammals have hair or fur. They're warm-blooded, which means they can maintain a constant body temperature. Most mammals produce young that develop inside their mother. They're born alive and feed on their mother's milk. The next group of vertebrates are easy to recognise: birds. Their covering of feathers is very distinctive. This is a macaw. Birds have wings, most of them fly, and they reproduce by laying eggs with hard shells. Why is the hard shell important?
What I want you to do is hold it. Just both hands out. Don't actually grab a hold of the snake, let it run over your hands.
This vertebrate is a Californian king snake. It belongs to the group called reptiles. You can tell this because its skin is covered in dry scales. Reptiles can't keep themselves at a constant temperature like mammals can. Instead, they stay at the same temperature as their surroundings. Like birds, they lay eggs, but reptiles' eggs have a soft shell. So what kind of vertebrate is a giant tortoise? What about its skin covering? It looks very different to a snake, but it does have a dry, scaly skin, so it must be a reptile. These vertebrates are covered in scales, but they're not reptiles. Sardines are a type of fish. Fish scales feel damp and slippery.
All the scales are coming off on there.
Fish take the temperature of their surroundings and live in water, where they lay soft eggs to produce their young. A toad belongs to the final group of vertebrates, amphibians. It's covered with a smooth, wet skin and is the only type of vertebrate able to live both on land and in water. Sometimes it isn't obvious which group of vertebrates an animal belongs to. What about these freshwater seals? They can live in water and look a bit like fish, but their body is covered in fur. Remember, skin covering is an important clue. Test yourself. Megatherium was a large mammal. It is now extinct. The diagram shows what scientists think Megatherium looked like. How can you tell from the drawing that Megatherium was a mammal? Give one other way that mammals are different from other vertebrate animals. This section revises feeding relationships. Here's what you need to know.
Plants are producers. They use sunlight to produce glucose, which they use for food. Animals are consumers. They get their food by eating plants and even other animals. This is a simple food chain. Rabbit eats plants and fox eats rabbit. Food chains and food webs illustrate feeding patterns. You need to know how to use them and how the number of plants and animals in a food chain can be shown as a pyramid of numbers.
Watch this. Food chains often begin with green plants. In this pretend habitat, the plants are lettuce. The small animals feeding on them are rabbits. But foxes also live here, and they eat rabbits. Here's the diagram to represent the food chain. Lettuce are producers. They convert the sun's energy into glucose. Some of the energy in the lettuce is passed on to the rabbits. Some of the energy in the rabbits is passed on to the foxes at the top of the food chain. Rabbits and foxes are consumers. Remember, the arrows always show the direction of energy flow. But not all the energy gets passed along the chain. Just staying alive takes a lot of the energy an animal gets from its food. It's needed for growth, movement, and keeping warm. To look at the number of each species in a food chain, you need a pyramid of numbers. There are fewer rabbits than lettuces, and fewer foxes than rabbits. Each rabbit eats a lot of lettuce, and each fox will eat quite a few rabbits. In any food chain, if you change the population of one species, it can affect the others. Lake Windermere in the Lake District is home to a type of fish called Arctic char. Scientists are concerned that the number of char is decreasing. Arctic char feed on tiny animals called zooplankton. The zooplankton are being collected so that scientists can study their eating habits. These zooplankton feed on algae, a type of plant that grows in water. Under the microscope, it's possible to see the zooplankton feeding. Arctic char, zooplankton and algae are linked by a simple food chain. Again, starting with the producer, algae use energy from the sun to make glucose. Next, the consumers. Zooplankton eat algae and Arctic char eat zooplankton. But Arctic char are also eaten by another fish, the pike. This is the top predator. Here's the pyramid of numbers for this marine food chain. So how can the number of char be increased? If there were more algae, there would be more zooplankton and more Arctic char. But a huge increase in algae only gives a few extra char. Another way is to start at the top. If there were no pike to eat the Arctic char, their numbers should increase. But life isn't that simple. There are other food chains in this marine habitat. Trout also live in the lake. They eat Arctic char, but get eaten by pike. No pike would mean more trout, which might mean less Arctic char. The balance of life is very complicated. A food web shows how the food chains are connected. It's a more realistic picture of the feeding patterns. Test yourself. The drawings show 4 living things. Frogs eat slugs. Slugs eat lettuce. Crows eat frogs. Complete the food chain.